The geopolitical architecture of the Middle East disintegrated on the 4th of February 2026. Following months of failed diplomacy, Tehran executed Operation Great Prophet VIII, a saturated kinetic strike against U.S. Fifth Fleet assets. 32 ballistic missiles impacted the port of Jebel Ali and the Strait of Hormuz, causing significant structural damage to the forward-deployed carrier strike groups. The global oil supply halted instantly. Washington's response was not a limited retaliatory strike, but a full-scale theater intervention. Operation Persian Shield mobilized 3 Marine Expeditionary Forces and the XV-8 Airborne Corps. The objective: total neutralization of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, and the removal of the clerical leadership. By hour 48, the American war machine initiated the largest amphibious assault since Inchon. 200,000 personnel, supported by 3,000 main battle tanks and 10,000 armored vehicles, converged on the Iranian coastline. The technological and numerical disparity was absolute. The United States military moved with a singular, violent purpose: the complete erasure of the Iranian military apparatus from the global order of battle. The first boots hit the sand at Bandar Abbas under the cover of massive naval gunfire. The U.S. 1st Marine Division encountered the IRGC 41st Thurala Division dug into the jagged coastal ridgelines. There were no warnings. There was only the sound of high-velocity lead impacting reinforced concrete. Marine rifle squads advanced in fire and maneuver formations, utilizing M27 infantry automatic rifles to suppress Iranian bunker complexes. The IRGC defenders responded with heavy machine gun fire and rocket-propelled grenades. The engagement was immediate and visceral. In the outskirts of the city, the 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines, pushed through a dense industrial zone. Iranian infantry utilized the labyrinth of shipping containers and warehouses to launch close-quarters ambushes. The air was thick with the smell of cordite and burning diesel. Individual Marine fire teams moved house to house, clearing rooms with fragmentation grenades and rapid-fire bursts. Every corner was a kill zone. The IRGC infantry, despite being outmatched in precision, utilized static defense lines and deep trench systems to slow the American momentum. Bayonets were fixed in the narrow alleyways. The sound of metal clashing against metal and the rhythmic thud of mortars dominated the auditory landscape. American infantrymen utilized M320 grenade launchers to collapse rooftop sniper nests, while Iranian PKM gunners maintained continuous fire corridors across the main boulevards. The casualty rate climbed within the first 6 hours. The 41st Thurala Division attempted a localized counterattack, sending waves of light infantry into the Marine flanks. The assault was met with a wall of fire. M249 light machine guns and M240B medium machine guns created interlocking sectors of fire that decimated the Iranian ranks. There was no retreat for either side. The American line held, then pushed forward, grinding through the Iranian perimeter. The ground was littered with spent brass casings and discarded equipment. The urban terrain of Bandar Abbas became a meat grinder. Marine combat engineers used C4 charges to breach compound walls, bypassing the deadly fatal funnels of the streets. By nightfall, the front line had moved 3 kilometers inland. The Iranian coastal defense was punctured. The remaining IRGC infantry retreated into the mountainous terrain to the north, leaving behind a shattered city. The American infantry secured the port facilities, establishing a firm bridgehead for the arrival of heavy armor. The initial kinetic contact confirmed the brutality of the conflict, a direct, unyielding collision of 2 professional militaries, where the only metric of success was the physical destruction of the enemy's will to resist. The infantry battle served as the violent prelude to the mechanical devastation that would follow. The transition from coastal urban clearing to inland maneuver warfare marked the beginning of a massive armored escalation. As the bridgehead at Bandar Abbas stabilized, the U.S. 1st Armored Division unloaded hundreds of M1A3 Abrams main battle tanks and M2A4 Bradley fighting vehicles. The Iranian High Command responded by deploying the 16th Armored Division and the 81st Armored Division from the strategic reserves in Shiraz and Avaz. The central plains of Hormozgan became a graveyard of scorched steel. The American armored doctrine emphasized long-range kinetic energy penetrators and thermal dominance. At a distance of 4,000 meters, the M1A3 crews engaged Iranian Karar and T-72Z tanks before the Iranian gunners could even acquire a visual lock. The desert floor vibrated under the rhythmic discharge of 120mm smoothbore cannons. The 1st Armored Brigade combat team moved in a wide wedge formation across the arid flats. Iranian armored units attempted to utilize the hull-down positions behind natural sand berms, but the American firepower was relentless. M829, a 4 sabot rounds, sliced through the Iranian composite armor with terrifying ease. The sky was filled with the streaks of Tau, 2B missiles launched from Bradley platforms, striking the thinner top armor of the Iranian tanks. The Iranian 16th Armored Division attempted a desperate flank maneuver near the Minab junction. Over 200 Karar tanks charged into the American left flank, firing on the move. The desert air turned into a vortex of dust, smoke, and fire. The collision was catastrophic. At ranges of less than 1,000 meters, the engagement became a chaotic brawl of heavy metal. American tank commanders used their superior situational awareness to pick apart the Iranian formations. An Iranian Karar tank managed to score a direct hit on an Abrams frontal glacis, but the depleted uranium armor held, the kinetic energy dissipating into a shower of sparks. In response, the Abrams returned fire, the 120mm shell vaporizing the Iranian turret in a secondary ammunition explosion. The jack-in-the-box effect was seen across the horizon, as Iranian tanks suffered catastrophic internal failures. The sheer volume of fire from the American side suppressed any attempt at a coordinated Iranian retreat. On the eastern flank, the 2nd Marine Tank Battalion engaged IRGC mechanized infantry units. The Iranian side utilized the Zulfikar, 3 tanks, in a last-ditch effort to hold the highway leading to the interior. The American armor moved with a synchronized mechanical precision that the Iranian forces could not replicate. Every Iranian muzzle flash was met with 3 American responses. The sound of high-explosive anti-tank, heat rounds, detonating against steel was constant. The landscape was soon dotted with the burning husks of the 81st Armored Division's assets. Oil and hydraulic fluid leaked into the sand, igniting into black, greasy pyres that rose hundreds of feet into the air. The Iranian armored capability was being systematically dismantled. The American M1A3S pushed through the burning remnants of the 1st defensive line, their tracks grinding over the debris of war. The Iranian crews, realizing the futility of direct confrontation, began to abandon their vehicles, but there was nowhere to run in the open desert. The American pursuit was cold and mechanical. Thermal optics tracked the heat signatures of retreating units through the dust clouds, and long-range fire continued to strike with surgical indifference. The armored escalation had reached its peak, and the Iranian heavy forces were no longer a cohesive fighting unit. By the end of the 48th hour of the armored push, the U.S. forces had destroyed an estimated 400 Iranian tanks and 600 armored personnel carriers. The 1st Armored Division had punctured a 60-kilometer hole in the Iranian secondary defense line. The path to the interior was now open. The mechanical superiority of the United States had reduced the pride of the Iranian armored corps to twisted, smoldering wreckage. The focus now shifted toward the northern plains, where the scale of the conflict would expand from tactical engagements to a full-scale divisional campaign involving the total integration of all combat arms. The conflict transitioned from localized armored thrusts into a theater-wide divisional offensive. The U.S. Army's 101st Airborne Division Air Assault and the 1st Cavalry Division initiated a massive pincer movement designed to encircle the remnants of the Iranian Southern Command. This was the dawn of multi-domain combined arms integration on a scale not seen in decades. The synchronization of M109A7 Paladin 155mm self-propelled howitzers with forward-deployed cavalry squadrons created a continuous curtain of fire. High-explosive and dual-purpose improved conventional munitions, DPICM, rained down on IRGC staging areas with mathematical precision. The Iranian 92nd Armored Division, once the Iron Fist of Khuzestan, found itself trapped in a steel noose between the Zagros Mountains and the advancing American columns. The sky belonged to the AH-64E Apache Guardian. Operating in heavy attack battalions, the Apaches hunted Iranian mobile air defense units and command nodes. Hellfire missiles struck with terrifying accuracy, neutralizing Tor, M1 and Bavar 373 batteries before they could cycle their radars. Without air cover, the Iranian ground forces were exposed to the full weight of the American divisional fire plan. The 1st Cavalry Division's M1A3 Abrams tanks surged forward, supported by M2A4 Bradley fighting vehicles that utilized their 25mm Bushmaster cannons to suppress Iranian anti-tank guided missile ATGM teams hidden in the rocky defiles. The sound of the battlefield was a continuous, low-frequency roar, the sound of thousands of internal combustion engines, and the relentless percussion of heavy ordnance. In the central sector, the 101st Airborne executed a series of vertical envelopments. Longbow Apaches cleared landing zones for waves of CH-47F Chinooks and UH-60M Blackhawks, depositing thousands of air assault troops behind Iranian defensive lines. These units seized critical infrastructure, including bridge crossings over the Karun River and key mountain passes, effectively severing the Iranian supply lines. The Iranian infantry, caught between the hammer of the 1st Cavalry and the anvil of the 101st, disintegrated. The IRGC tried to mobilize its Basid paramilitary wings as a human wave deterrent, but the American combined arms machine operated with a cold industrial efficiency that rendered massed infantry tactics suicidal. Field artillery units utilized the M142 HIMARS to strike deep into the Iranian rear, targeting divisional headquarters and communication hubs. The Iranian command and control structure began to fracture. Orders were not reaching the front. Units were fighting in isolation, unaware that their neighboring divisions had already been bypassed or destroyed. The 1st Marine Division, moving up the eastern axis, linked with the 1st Cavalry Division near Shiraz, completing a massive encirclement of over 50,000 Iranian combatants. The American divisional commanders utilized reconnaissance pull tactics, identifying gaps in the Iranian lines and surging mechanized forces through the ruptures before the defenders could reposition. The Iranian logistics network was non-existent. Without fuel or ammunition resupply, the remaining Iranian tanks were used as static pillboxes, only to be systematically picked off by American longbow radar-guided missiles from over the horizon. The mechanical harmony of the American assault, where infantry, armor, and rotary wing aviation moved as a single organism, overwhelmed the Iranian capacity for cognitive processing. Every defensive maneuver attempted by the IRGC was countered by a pre-planned American contingency. The divisional phase of the war demonstrated the absolute obsolescence of static defense in the face of hypermobile, integrated combat power. By the end of the first week of this phase, the Iranian 16th, 81st, and 92nd Armored Divisions were removed from the order of battle. The wreckage of thousands of vehicles clogged the primary transit corridors. The U.S. forces had captured over 20,000 prisoners of war, while the remainder of the Iranian forces fled toward the interior, abandoning their heavy equipment. The American juggernaut did not slow down. It refueled on the move, its eyes already fixed on the high plateau of Tehran. The combined arms integration had turned a military conflict into a systematic liquidation of enemy assets. The operational scale shifted from divisional maneuvers to a massive field army-level offensive, designated Operation Final Reckoning. The U.S. Third Army and the I Corps coordinated a frontal assault against the Tehran defense sector, an area fortified by the remnants of the IRGC's most fanatical units. This was no longer a battle of maneuver, it was a campaign of industrial-scale liquidation. Over 500 M1, a 3 Abrams tanks formed a singular armored spearhead 10 miles wide, moving across the calm Tehran corridor. Behind them, 2,000 Bradley and Stryker vehicles carried the full weight of the American infantry power. The sky was a permanent haze of smoke, as thousands of 155mm artillery shells and M31GM LRS rockets saturated every square meter of the Iranian defensive belt. The Iranian Zulfikar Line, A complex network of deep-buried bunkers, anti-tank ditches, and reinforced concrete dragon's teeth was the last obstacle. The IRGC deployed their final strategic reserve, the 1st Mohammad Rasulullah Division and the 2nd Sayyid al-Shohada Division. These units represented the ideological core of the regime. The contact was apocalyptic. As the American armored vanguard reached the outer suburbs, the Iranian defenders unleashed a saturation fire of Tufan and Delavia anti-tank missiles. The lead M1A3 tanks took multiple hits, their active protection systems firing rapidly to intercept the incoming projectiles. The desert echoed with the sound of kinetic penetrators breaking the sound barrier and the thunderous impact of 120mm shells vaporizing reinforced bunkers. In the southern approaches to the capital, the U.S. Army's 4th Infantry Division engaged in a massive mechanical breakthrough. M1150 assault breacher vehicles (ABV) moved to the front, their Miklik, mine-clearing line charge rockets trailing thousands of pounds of C4 into the Iranian minefields. The resulting explosions cleared paths hundreds of yards long, allowing the Abrams and Bradleys to surge through the gaps. The Iranian defenders attempted to close the breach with T-72S tanks and BMP-2S, leading to a collision of steel that lasted for 48 hours without interruption. The American fire control systems, operating in a target-rich environment, achieved a kill ratio of nearly 40-1. Entire Iranian tank companies were neutralized in minutes. The destruction was not limited to the front lines. Heavy B-52H and B-1B bombers, operating outside the range of the few remaining Iranian SAM sites, dropped thousands of tons of JDAMs on the IRGC's logistical hubs and command bunkers within Tehran itself. The city's industrial periphery was transformed into a landscape of fire. The U.S. Army's 18th Field Artillery Brigade maintained a constant steel rain over the Iranian assembly areas, preventing any coordinated counterattack. The Iranian military structure was no longer a functioning entity. It was a collection of isolated pockets of resistance being systematically erased by a superior mechanical force. As the American forces reached the city limits of Tehran, the scale of destruction intensified. The IRGC utilized heavy engineering equipment to block major transit routes with the wreckage of their own vehicles. American combat engineers, supported by the 1st Cavalry's armored units, used D9R armored bulldozers to clear the paths, literally grinding the remnants of the Iranian military into the pavement. The auditory environment was a continuous roar of jet engines, heavy machine guns, and the earth-shaking thud of 2,000-pound bombs. The Iranian 1st Division attempted a final stand at the Karaj Gate, but the American response was a synchronized barrage from 3 battalions of Paladin howitzers. The Iranian position ceased to exist in less than 10 minutes. The American Field Army moved with the cold precision of a tectonic plate. There was no room for negotiation or tactical pauses. The mission was the total physical destruction of the enemy's capacity to field an army. In the eastern sector, the U.S. 25th Infantry Division executed a flanking maneuver that trapped the Iranian Third Army against the salt flats of the Dashti Kavir. With nowhere to retreat and no heavy weapons left to counter the American armor, the Iranian formations were pulverized. The mechanical attrition was total. Thousands of Iranian armored vehicles lay shattered across the plains, their crews having been incinerated within the steel hulls. The final perimeter of Tehran was breached on February 14. The American forces did not enter the city for a traditional occupation. They entered to dismantle. The IRGC's elite Praetorian Guards, the Quds ground elements, were engaged by the 75th Ranger Regiment and the 1st Marine Division in the government district. The resistance was fanatical but ultimately futile against the weight of American combined arms. The concrete structures of the Ministry of Defense and the IRGC headquarters were reduced to gravel by direct tank fire and thermobaric munitions. The American flag was not raised over the ruins. Instead, the focus remained on the total neutralization of any remaining hostile heat signatures. By the end of this phase, the Iranian order of battle was officially declared extinct. All 12 regular army divisions and 15 IRGC divisions were destroyed, captured, or rendered combat ineffective. The American losses, while significant in hardware, were minimal compared to the total erasure of the opposing force. The high-intensity conflict had reached its zenith, leaving the Iranian state without a military and the capital city under the shadow of American heavy armor. The stage was set for the final pursuit of the leadership and the termination of the campaign. The final phase of Operation Persian Shield commenced with the activation of the U.S. Army's Strategic Reserve, the 82nd Airborne Division, and the 3rd Infantry Division, mechanized. These fresh, combat-ready echelons were funneled into the shattered heart of Tehran to conduct the terminal liquidation of the regime's remaining assets. While the 1st Marine Division and the 1st Cavalry Division maintained the external containment ring, the 82nd Airborne executed a series of high-precision vertical insertions directly into the Green Sector, the heavily fortified administrative district housing the Supreme Leader's residence, and the command bunkers of the High Council for National Security. The Iranian defenders, now reduced to fragmented groups of IRGC Special Forces, and the remnants of the Sabrin unit, attempted to transform the urban ruins into a fortress. They utilized the vast network of underground tunnels and reinforced basements to launch desperate, close-quarter ambushes. However, the American response was devoid of hesitation. The 3rd Infantry Division deployed M1135 Stryker NBC reconnaissance vehicles and M1A3 Abrams tanks equipped with Tusk tank urban survival kit to clear the main avenues. Every building suspected of harboring hostile fire was subjected to reconnaissance by fire with 120mm canisters and 50 caliber heavy machine guns. The urban landscape was systematically leveled to deny the enemy any concealment. Deep within the subterranean complexes beneath the Sadabad Palace, the final remnants of the Iranian leadership were trapped. The U.S. Army Special Operations Command, supported by Delta Force and SEAL Team 6, led the breach into the bunker systems. The American units utilized thermobaric grenades and robotic breaching charges to collapse reinforced steel doors. There were no negotiations. The IRGC guards who refused to lay down arms were neutralized with surgical speed. The air inside the tunnels was a stagnant mix of smoke, dust, and the ozone scent of high explosives. The mechanical hum of American tactical equipment was the only sound in the darkness of the bunkers. On the morning of February 15, the final defensive line protecting the Beit Rabari, the leader's house, collapsed. American M2A4 Bradleys crashed through the ornamental gates, their 25mm cannons shredding the last of the IRGC ceremonial guards. Infantry squads from the 82nd Airborne moved room to room, utilizing advanced thermal imaging to track movement through the dust-choked corridors. In a deep-level command center, hardened against nuclear impact but vulnerable to the relentless pressure of American ground penetration, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was located. He was found among a small group of surviving advisors, his military command structure having completely evaporated 48 hours prior. The capture was conducted with cold, professional efficiency. There was no theatricality. The target was secured, identified, and extracted via a specialized MH-47G Chinook extraction team from the center of the palace grounds. Simultaneously, the last organized Iranian military unit, the 23rd Special Forces Division, surrendered in the northern Alborz foothills after being targeted by a massive psychological warfare broadcast and the visual reality of 1,000 American armored vehicles surrounding their positions. The Iranian order of battle was officially cleared. Every major military installation from the Persian Gulf to the Caspian Sea was under U.S. military control. The aftermath of the conflict was a landscape of absolute mechanical dominance. For hundreds of miles, the highways were littered with the calcined remains of Iran's industrial and military ambitions. 5,000 Iranian tanks, 8,000 armored vehicles, and nearly 2,000 artillery pieces were recorded as destroyed or captured. The clerical regime's elite IRGC was no longer a functioning organization. It was a memory preserved in the twisted metal of the Tehran defense sector. The American field armies began the process of establishing a massive security perimeter around the country, transitioning from active combat to theater-wide stabilization. The strategic objectives of the United States had been met with a brutality and speed that defied traditional military projections. In 15 days, a regional power with decades of military preparation had been dismantled. The capture of the supreme leader marked the symbolic and functional end of the war. The American military machine, having fulfilled its directive of total neutralization, stood as the sole arbiter of power in the region. The silence that fell over Tehran was not the silence of peace, but the heavy, oppressive quiet of a nation whose entire military identity had been violently erased from history. Operation Persian Shield was concluded. The Iranian state, as a military entity, had ceased to exist.